The marriage of creativity and commerce that produces the majority of modern art and entertainment simply doesn't work. Because when the release of a film, game, or TV show has to directly translate to shareholder profits, the decisions made around those artistic works will almost always be driven by money instead of imagination. And I don't believe it's possible to make good, worthwhile art when the primary goal of that art is to make money. We find ourselves living at a time when more cash than ever before is spent producing dramatically more content than any single person could hope to see. And yet, fewer risks are taken every day and the stories themselves have less and less to say. I want to be clear that I don't think all is lost here. I do think there are solutions, and I still believe there are millions of people doing everything they can to put meaningful media out into the world. I will always celebrate any game or film or TV show when it feels like its creators have fought against the odds to create something worthwhile. But that doesn't mean there isn't a huge problem with the creative industries on the whole that is slowly but surely killing creativity and art itself.
Dramatic new twists explode onto your screen with a variety of unique situations to solve.
Don't give up on us!
I feel I should say early on that I don't have a problem with relatively shallow, flashy entertainment by itself. I don't think a vapid Hollywood action movie is entirely bad if it brings family or friends together for an evening. And I don't think a game that is mostly composed of familiar blockbuster action with very little depth is bad either, if it brings the player joy for even a few hours. Essentially, I think it's fine to enjoy even an entirely creatively bankrupt piece of media. Nobody should feel bad about being distracted and entertained by something distracting and entertaining. But we should still demand better because these experiences mean so much more when they go beyond distracting. For as long as human beings have told stories, which is almost certainly as long as we've been around, we have built upon and reinterpreted the same tales again and again. And all of these stories, in a sense, are the same. Every hero's journey and redemption arc exists to tell us something about our humanity, to reflect our own lives and give tangible shapes to our personal struggles. You could try to argue that Harry Potter is just Star Wars with a fresh coat of paint, and Star Wars is just Dune, which is really just the Arthurian legend, which is actually just the Odyssey, which is basically just the Epic of Gilgamesh. And to some extent, you'd be right. But you'd also be very wrong to insist that none of these stand on their own as uniquely drawn, worthwhile stories. I don't think there's anything wrong with stories building upon one another then. The real problem is when stories are simply recycled and regurgitated. For the purposes of this discussion, it might be helpful to imagine the way someone tells a story as similar to the way you might cook a meal. Imagine a garden full of fruit and vegetables, all of which represents the key components of the human experience. These are the ingredients of every story, in the form of trials and tribulations, comforts and distractions. And from these ingredients, storytellers could cook up endless varieties of meals. They might not venture far into the garden and only pick out the closest vegetables to prepare a meal, but it could still end up being a nourishing dish. And though the next person could create something entirely new from the garden, they could also just build on that meal that came before, or make the exact same recipe themselves. If they do make the same recipe, like Hollywood might remake a well-known story, then that meal could still be okay. But there's every chance that the chef won't do as good of a job as the person who came before. And aside from anything else, it will be clear to whoever is eating that the meal is basically the same as one they've had before. All that said, though, I don't think that anyone using this garden of human experience to prepare a meal, be it entirely original or eerily familiar, is ever a bad thing in itself. Sometimes the food will be terrible, but you can at least appreciate the effort to innovate. And sometimes it will be delicious, but just nothing new. The problem is, at some point, that with the expansion of civilization itself, these meals, these works of art, could no longer just be shared among communities. They had to be bought and sold to make things work. The kitchen by the garden then turned into a restaurant, and slowly it began to matter more and more which meals people actually wanted to eat most. The chefs cooking up these stories became beholden to micromanagers who have no idea how to make food, but do know what food is selling the best and can take a guess at what might sell well in the future. If everybody who enters the restaurant wants a cheeseburger, then it would be foolish of that restaurant to stop making cheeseburgers. And it becomes too risky to allow a chef to try something new. So soon enough, every chef that enters the kitchen is making cheeseburgers, every diner is eating cheeseburgers, nobody is enjoying any of it, and we've all forgotten that any other kind of meal even exists. I'm aware that was a very long-winded way of saying that games and films have basically become a bit samey, but I think it's helpful to understand how the imposition of business values on the creative process can erode creativity itself. Wherever creativity has won out, it has been because the chefs in the kitchen have been given a real opportunity to cook something special, and not because they've been optimizing for what they think the diners want to eat or what they'll pay for. I have personally always tried to support the good wherever I can find it in the artistic products coming out of the kitchen, because I genuinely believe that there are still plenty of people out there trying to make good stuff despite the environment they find themselves in. But I think it is absolutely critical to remember that the unmitigated artistic successes that we occasionally see these days are the exceptions that prove the rule. Death Stranding 2 is an impressive video game achievement largely because Kojima Productions is in a wonderful situation where Kojima is able to maintain control while still being supported with publishing deals. But that situation is rare and fragile. You only have to look at a studio like Remedy, where they've also managed to maintain a high degree of control over their games, but have clearly struggled to balance the numbers even with publishing deals and after releasing critically lauded games like Alan Wake 2. The fact that even they ended up making a multiplayer game with FBC Firebreak says a lot about the difficult financial situation developers find themselves in. In the worlds of film and TV, things are equally strange. The Star Wars spin-off TV show Andor is one of the greatest programs to be released in the past few years, against all the odds while working within the Hollywood framework. But the bulk of the rest of Disney Plus's TV slate are embarrassing examples of poorly cooked, familiar recipes. It was nice to see a film like Sinners succeed at the cinema, but again it stands as an obvious outlier. And the same goes for the less successful Mickey 17, a film that is far from perfect, but is definitely a lot more interesting artistically than Captain America: Brave New World. When artists are given the chance to create something new and realize their own unique vision, it is always, in my eyes, a wonderful thing. Whether that project ends up being a masterpiece or a dreadful mess. But it only ever happens because they have proven themselves to be an entity capable of making headlines and money. And even then, it's never a sure thing. Despite directing several films that are considered among the greatest of all time, Francis Ford Coppola had to self-finance his dream project Megalopolis. And though the studios probably made the right call not putting their money behind that film, you can't deny that the final product is at least a unique new meal well deserving of serious discussion. When so many films and games are so expensive to make, though, it's not hard to see why it's become more important that they are financially viable than they are artistically worthwhile.
Oh, I have these notes on how to cook this thing, but my handwriting is atrocious. Why is this so much harder than I remember?
Throughout history, art in the form of plays, paintings, and novels has always been relatively cheap and easy to produce. But with the invention of film, things slowly began to change on that front. Artists behind the cameras soon became more ambitious because they could afford to be. Once films could be cheaply replicated and released en masse in theaters across the world, taking a fee from each and every viewer, then more money could reasonably be spent on the production of those films. Eventually, sound-synced and color cinema arrived, and as filmmakers pushed spectacle to new limits, cinema infrastructure grew and audiences did with them. When TV arrived on the scene, films had to get even bigger. Ben-Hur and Cleopatra commanded insane budgets and brought in big audiences. And then came the blockbusters of the 70s. Jaws and Star Wars were jaw-dropping, startling experiences that proved the potential of cinema to consistently bring in the big bucks with big ideas. And at the same time, video games were growing from a niche novelty into an expansive art form and entertainment medium, with its own unique advantages over cinema and TV. Throughout the course of the next half-century, though, films, video games, and TV would all slowly change, mostly for the worse and largely because of money. While films and TV programs continued to get more expensive to make into the 21st century owing to increasingly bloated productions and the adoption of CGI, video games also went very quickly from being products thrown together by a few nerds in a couple of months to requiring half a decade and hundreds of employees to even reach the minimum acceptable standard of a AAA game. As film developed as a medium, a clearer picture and better technology in general did require that producers spend more money and pay more attention to the details. But that transition doesn't feel nearly as dramatic as gaming's transformation from 2D sprites to photorealistic 3D characters. Obviously, there are still plenty of games developed with simpler art styles and mechanics, but a relentless quest for detail and expansive worlds has resulted in a situation where player expectations can only be met with tremendous budgets and ridiculous timeframes. Just like indie films are often the most interesting and innovative films you can watch these days, indie games are often the most innovative and interesting games you can play. But everything indie struggles to expand beyond a niche audience and capture the attention of the general public. As much as I love indie stuff, I know I'm a part of the problem because I still love big films and big games too. By the time of its release, Grand Theft Auto 6 is rumored to have cost at least $1 billion and possibly up to $2 billion, including marketing costs, far exceeding the budget of even the most expensive films. In that sense, it is arguably the largest investment in a single entertainment product of all time. 2K Games didn't put all that money behind GTA 6 because they believe in the vision or the artistic value, though. They did so because GTA 5 was a behemoth, because Rockstar are rock stars, and if any game has the potential to make unlimited money, it's GTA 6. You do have to give them some credit for allowing such a lengthy development process and not rushing the game out. But I largely think that's because the leadership are just smart enough to understand how bad a rushed game release can be for business, and because they can actually afford a delay. Mind's Eye, the game from former Rockstar North president Leslie Benzies, obviously couldn't afford to be delayed for further polish, resulting in some very bad reviews at release. A lot of the issues that game had could have been fixed with more time, but obviously Mind's Eye has many other big issues beyond lack of polish. For one thing, it is yet another example of a recycled, regurgitated concept. It was sold from the beginning as a GTA-style game, but Benzie's new studio obviously didn't have the manpower, expertise, or time to pull off anything close to the scale and detail that Rockstar can manage. So ultimately, they cooked up a meal with a similar recipe, but the veggies ended up undercooked and went cold on the plate. Mind's Eye was clearly designed from the ground up to be the kind of game that could potentially make a lot of money. They wanted it to be a GTA-style blockbuster, and I'm sure many of the creatives involved did their best to make something good, but it was a deeply flawed concept from the start. The most talented writers, artists, and creatives don't choose to create to make money, because most of them won't make that much money in their lifetimes anyway. They create because they have an urge to create. But for a long time now, many of those lucky enough to even find work in the creative industries have also found themselves becoming little more than a cog in a machine producing whatever the CEOs and shareholders mandate. And no matter how important that cog is, it's rarely even rewarded for what it contributes. When films and games can cost millions or billions to create, they are naturally going to be handled with extreme caution by businessmen seeking to optimize for profit. And you can't entirely blame those business people for doing what they know how to do and misunderstanding what makes something good and worth people's money in the process. The problem simply is that art isn't a product that can be built and improved by committees and financial mandates. When the realities of business dictate creative decisions, it generally just means recycling and reordering only what has worked before. It means making more and more superhero films because that's the thing that made the most money recently, and it means developing live service battle royale games because those are the games that have the potential to be the most consistently profitable. It means taking risks only when the payoff is potentially huge and playing it very safe for the rest of the time. Maybe in an ideal world, all art would be free. Movies and TV and games would be subsidized and sponsored by big business to allow creators to tell unique stories and offer unique experiences to everyone. In an ideal world, we wouldn't measure the success of an original story using sales numbers or box office receipts. It would be great if art wasn't a product and it was just art. But unfortunately, that's not the reality we live in. So games will keep costing money and cinema tickets will get more expensive. The only power you have over what gets made right now comes from voting with your wallet. Though I'm not convinced that we as a collective audience necessarily have the best judgment on these matters. Nevertheless, we should at the very least try to resist the worst of it. And with the advent of AI storytelling, this is more important than ever. As time has passed and technology has improved, the chefs in the kitchen have found new ways of cooking up these artistic meals. And that's been wonderful for cooking/storytelling potential on the whole. That is, until the AI blender arrived in the kitchen, as someone realized that they can simply gather the leftovers from previous meals and mix them all together to create a sludge that sort of resembles meals that people have enjoyed in the past, but without any real substance or artistic intent. Though being served your 57th Fast and the Furious meal on a plate may be overly familiar, it could still provide some nourishment. But we can be absolutely certain that whatever emerges from the AI blender won't be very nutritious at all. I will always prefer a badly written human story over a badly written AI story. For now, for my part, I'm going to continue enjoying and supporting and sharing real creativity wherever I see it, while quietly hoping we won't collectively lose humanity's creative spark. But what do you think of the current state of art and entertainment? Let me know in the comments, and please do like and subscribe if you'd like to hear me talk more stories. Otherwise, I'll see you next time around.